All right, let's get this over with. Golf, Leafs, golf. Golf, Leafs, golf. Golf, Leafs, golf. Golf, Leafs, golf. That's what y'all want to hear, right? Everybody loves to just laugh at the misfortunes of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And hey, there's been plenty of comedic fodder offered over the last, who are we kidding, almost 6 decades now, but especially the last 2 decades. One playoff series win in 20 years, and lucky to get that one last year over the Lightning. Yeah, not great. And obviously, the ghosts of Bruins past, they decided to rear their head again. And yeah, here we are looking at more early tea times here for the Toronto Maple Leafs after a failure of a postseason playoff run. Lord Stanley doesn't seem any closer now than it's ever been. In fact, yeah, it's at the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto. Probably the closest any Toronto associated operation's going to get to it for quite some time. At least the way things are constructed. Now, before I get too far, this isn't really going to be anything overly hot takey. After all, this is being recorded a couple days after Game 7 between the Leafs and the Bruins. So there's been a little bit of time. All the hot takes are out there. You know where to find them. You know what people are talking about. I'm not really offering anything new here. And you're not going to see anything like overly wild like Steve Dangle's fan reactions. Don't get me wrong. Love Steve Dangle's work. Love the passion he has for the fan base. Just not how I operate. And honestly, the way this team has constantly tripped over the first hurdle year after year after year, it's at the point of exhaustion. It's hard to maintain that level of passion, and I'm one of the many kids who had the Passion Returns on VHS as a kid. Even met the guy who produced it about 10 years ago. So yeah, kind of a big deal. Leafs fan, it's been in my blood pretty much ever since I was born. But when I think of the fact that my dad was 2 years old the last time the Leafs won a cup, and he's never lived to see the Leafs beat the Bruins in a playoff series. How stupid is that? I don't know what it is about the Bruins. They just can't seem to get over that particular hump. And it's always the same formula year after year, or at least attempt after attempt. Fall flat on your face in game one, give a little bit of hope in game two to split the series, take it back to Toronto, where you probably fall flat on your face, excuse me, for the next 2 nights, get run off the ice effectively. Then something weird happens. You just magically get hope. Games 5 and 6. It looks like they've finally started to turn a corner, only to get kicked in the balls again in game 7. And it seems to be happening in more ridiculous and nonsensical ways every single time. You could throw it was 4-1 in there from God knows how long ago now. It's forever burned into my brain. You could throw the game 7 where Jake Gardiner was a -5 in there. That was rough. You throw the other series, 1 of 2, where a boneheaded play from Nazem Kadri kind of cost the Leafs the season. These things have happened. But there's something different about this one. And to be quite honest, you can't forgive this one. The other ones, yeah, you could say, there's certain factions or whatever working against the Leafs. But ultimately, I think in all those cases, the Bruins were the better team. This year, I don't know if that's necessarily the case. Don't get me wrong. Boston, still good. They still have the DNA of that team that's, set a single season points record before, yeah, we all laughed in their faces after they got bounced in the first round last year. Yeah, maybe turnabout's fair play in this particular case. But again, I look back at this. There's just certain things that can't be forgiven, quite honestly. And I think for me, the most egregious thing the defensive back check on the OT winner. There is absolutely no way that Pasternak should have gotten to that puck. Yeah, it was a set play, but did you see how slow that puck was coming out of the corner? Give me 2 hard strides out of Morgan Riley there. He more than likely cuts off Pasternak's angle and gives Samsonov a little more comfort in net. Probably doesn't even have to make a play on it if Riley gets back, to be completely honest. And, that effort, you could even go a little bit further up the ice. Maybe, Mitch Marner jumps in to just kind of impede a stride or two. Not necessarily interference, especially not the way that game was being called. I believe there might have been 3 penalties at most. I'd have to look back at the game sheet. 1 power play on each side at minimum. I don't think there was much more than that, though. But ultimately, it kind of speaks to a DNA problem here. So I think the way it's been done, you're just kind of looking at, the definition of insanity over and over again, right? That's what it keeps saying. Try to do the same thing over and over and expect different results. Yeah, and doesn't necessarily work out ever. So goes without saying, feels like it should have been Sayonara Shanaplan a long time ago, because I don't know how anyone expects to be able to win with a roster where 4 guys pretty much until this year made up over half of your salary cap. And the only reason it's not this year is because of the jump that it took. It's kind of ridiculous. And you'll look at the effort of some of the guys there. Gotta say, as much as I don't want to be the guy to keep piling on Mitch Marner, it's really hard not to be. I mean, yeah, he scored a nice goal earlier in the series. Need to remind you, it was in Game 4. It was an absolutely meaningless time because the Leafs were already run off the ice by that point. So, you know what? Mitch Marner, you could consider him like Hall of Very Good, to paraphrase Down Goes Brown. In the playoffs, you may as well call him Casper. It's just never, ever really been there. And I know that, you look 1 year down the road, he and Tavares, their contracts come off the books. $22 million available to play with. You can't just let those assets walk for nothing. And I realize that it's difficult with both of them having no moves, but after this year, in Marner's case especially, you can only take so much, right? And yes, he's professed his love for the city of Toronto over and over. Why not? He's a kid who grew up there. Everyone eventually dreams of that or grows up with it. I mean, you have the John Tavares pajama photo. That was the big seller 6 years ago, I guess, whenever he signed. But eventually, in the long run, you start to realize that things just don't work as constituted. And that's just the reality of where things are right now. And again, I hate piling on the guy because regular season, he's shown flashes. I mean, he's been a consistent producer, but when it matters, it just has not been there. That's why, again, you're looking at 1 playoff series win since 2004. For an Original Six franchise, that is absolutely ridiculous. And yeah, it's really hard to know where to turn. Wherever they're turning, there's absolutely no way Sheldon Keefe can be behind the bench anymore. That, I think, is just, as close to being scientific fact as possible within the hockey landscape. And I mean, I think Keefe knows it too. I didn't quite catch what was said at the end of season press conference here today, which is Monday, May 6th. But all I needed to know was the quote from Game 7 in the immediate aftermath, where he said something to the effect of team's game plan for the Leafs to beat themselves. It's like he's run out of options. And no matter what kind of a brave face he wants to put on, seems like he's just exasperated. And as much as he says he wants to believe it, you know, things happening in the moment, they don't lie. They really don't. And in that press conference, no doubt you're running off of emotion. There's still adrenaline after, taking it to a game 7 in overtime. Good or bad, it's there. It's just a neurological response. That was a guy who was defeated. More so than in, all the other years that he's been defeated. But last year, he kind of got a pass for finally getting a series win over the Lightning, which, they squeaked by. That's the only reason we're not having this discussion 1 year ago. Like, honestly, this should have happened already. You see the way teams are being built now. They're not built on, being super top heavy. Oilers fans, eventually they're probably going to realize it here as well. Who knows? If they win this year, you know what? That's great for them. But they've been afflicted with the same kinds of things. McDavid and Draisaitl, $21 million combined on the cap, a number that's probably going to go up close to 50% if both of them stick around. Because I'm sorry, Draisaitl is going to want probably, if Matthews is 13.25, Draisaitl's probably looking at a 14, if we're going to be honest, and McDavid's already at 12.5. Like, realistically, you can, under the CBA, you can ask for up to 20%. McDavid will be the closest player to that number whenever he signs his deal. Like, there's absolutely no question in my mind about that. And I think it's pretty clear that he's earned every dollar of it. As crazy as it is to say that in kind of sporting economic landscape in relation to real life, he's earned that by comparison. But anyway, I digress. Again, just bringing it back to the Leafs, it's just too top heavy. They don't have the right pieces everywhere else. Like, yeah, they've tried. Like, they tried the Ryan Reeves experiment a little bit earlier this year. It didn't really work. I mean, healthy scratch late in the series. That tells you all you need to know, especially when he's a guy that you're kind of expecting to have that playoff sandpaper, that grit, the experience of getting to finals as well, for one thing. But yeah, he's a guy that, he just couldn't hack it in this lineup, unfortunately. It just wasn't the right fit, whether it was himself or whether it was something that Sheldon Keefe saw. Again, I think he'll probably be seeing the unemployment line sooner rather than later. That being Keefe, of course, I mentioned that earlier. But yeah, it just doesn't seem to work. And you know what? In order to move forward, you have to change something. And it has to be drastic. I mean, realistically, MLSE only has to look across the boardroom at what Masai Ujiri had to do 5 or 6 years ago. DeRozan and Lowry, it just wasn't working. What did they do? They made the big move and got rid of DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and the first rounder, brought in Kawhi Leonard. And yes, Danny Green was part of it too, but Kawhi Leonard was the main piece. What do they do a year later? They win a title. They bring in a guy who's a little bit more of a complete player, and that just energizes the team. It gives them a different dimension. It's, it was ultimately the piece that put them over the top after, being LeBronto the year before. Boston could probably lay a similar claim. Honestly, the ownership's probably even worse. But if they're not going to make the change now, when will they? Because, again, as hard as it will be with the no movement clauses of Marner and Tavares, something has to happen. And yeah, Marner, I think I mentioned it earlier, or if I did, it was in a previous taping. Yeah, he's a Toronto boy through and through. Of course, he's going to want to appreciate his time with the Leafs. Of course, he's going to want to stick around in his hometown. But eventually, you have to realize it's just not working. friendships be damned, you know? You just have to think about what's best kind of professionally and personally here. Like Marner, he's a guy that, yeah, he has the big ticket. He doesn't necessarily want to be viewed in that light. He's a guy that it's hard to figure out how to word this because there are contrasts between himself and the presentation of Austin Matthews. And Matthews, he's very much that guy. He embraces the spotlight. He embraces that role. Marner, a little bit more reticent to do so, to say the very least. And yeah, he's got his flashy moves, whatever. I think the most appropriate thing I read in regards to Marner, he needs his East-West game for the regular season to turn more into North-South. And that was something I observed during Game 7 as well. Like, don't get me wrong, the OT winner, I put 80% on Morgan Rielly at minimum because, yeah, there's absolutely no way that Pasternak should have gotten that puck with the speed it came out of that corner off of the bounce. A couple of hard strides from Rielly. That probably cuts off Pasternak's angle. Samsonov doesn't have to do anything, which, let's get on to that point. That was kind of ridiculous from Kelly Rudy to label Samsonov or to ascribe blame to him. No, because, and I get, yeah, he played in the NHL, so he sees things differently. That's not what should have been seen there. Like, yeah, Samsonov might have been a little bit hesitant once things developed, but in reality, it shouldn't have gotten to that point because whether it was Marner maybe just jamming up Pasternak a little bit as he was building up speed or Rielly cutting off that angle, that should never have gotten to Samsonov in the first place. And I'm not a Samsonov defender here, really, or at least I haven't been. I guess I kind of am by default, but if you think about it, if he makes the move to try and go for a poke check, you know, that kind of leaves him in no man's land. And the same fans who want to say, you know, oh, he was too tentative in the net, he was too far back, should have done this, should have done that, you'd be crucifying him for making a boneheaded play to leave the net open for Pasternak to chip it over him. So kind of a damned if he does, damned if he doesn't situation there, quite honestly. But how many of these situations have we seen where, again, it just gets more and more ridiculous every time we have to talk about this? It's just kind of where we are now, and it sucks to have to accept it again as a Leafs fan, but no turning back the clock on this one. And yeah, it's just rough. Something has to change though, for sure. And again, I don't know how high you want to go. Like, yeah, new president and Keith Belly are CEO of MLSE. I'll have to clarify that job title a little bit. Anyway, new guy at the top. He has no loyalty to anyone beneath him. He doesn't have to. He's got the ability to go full-on carte blanche here if he wants to. And honestly, he probably needs to. And the thing is, with the Leafs as currently constructed, it doesn't necessarily have to amount to a painful period. It doesn't have to be a full-on teardown, I don't think. Again, I think you follow the Raptors' blueprint. You take out a beloved piece. You bring in a piece or two that makes a lot more sense. And maybe you move on a little bit further. Maybe you finally reach that promised land. Now, that's way too early to say, and it's instilling entirely too much confidence in a team that, again, need to remind you, has won one playoff series in 20 years. Again, that's where we are right now. But again, I think it's at the point where you just have to do something. Because eventually, like, yeah, Leafs fans are passionate, but they're also impatient. And there's only so much of this they're going to take. I'm sure a lot of fans have reached a breaking point a long time ago. This is as close to mine personally as I've been. And I'm I like to think of myself as a rather rational Leafs fan. I'm not the guy who's gonna be, waving the flag, but I'd like to see them do well. But I'm also realistic about what I see. It's just a nature of the beast kind of thing. And you know what? Ultimately, yeah, analytics are one thing, advanced stats, blah, blah, blah. I'm kind of on the eye test side of things. Like, I gotta see it in order to believe it. And Leafs fans, there really, really hasn't been much to see over the last 20 years, has there? Like, how much more pain do we take here? Like, it has to change, quite honestly. And it's just, again, I don't know where to turn. It obviously can't happen with Sheldon Keefe behind the bench. I don't know what that replacement looks like, whether it's Craig Berube or somebody else. Still a lot to think about. Still a lot to kind of process over this off season. I mean, yeah, once we get to October, there'll be the usual congregation of hope, but I think it's clear now more than ever, they're not in a place where they can just run it back anymore. Something fundamental has to change with the Toronto Maple Leafs as it's constructed, or else, again, we're just going to be having these same conversations a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Austin Matthews will be in his grave someday, and we'll still be having these conversations about why the Toronto Maple Leafs can't do anything in the playoffs. 1967, as much as people want to throw that year into the faces of Leafs fans, it might get to 2067 and we'll have these discussions. I mean, ask a Chicago Cubs fan. It happens. But for now, again, it's just, you kind of have to forget all of this as a Leafs fan, no matter how fresh it is. There's 4.5 months until they try all over again. And it's been weird watching the last couple of years because I've been in the mindset of, you know what, regular season's one thing. Show me what they're going to do in April. And that's not a fair weather fan statement. That's just a realistic take from a guy that's, has just seen the same thing happen over and over again. And, doesn't really have a reason to expect anything different right now. But again, here we are. Golf, Leafs, golf. Golf, Leafs, golf. Golf, Leafs, golf. Painful as that is to say, that's where we are. And until something changes, that's where it's going to be. That's about it. I think I got it all out.